When a woman gives me compliments, I feel twice as good. But I love you men out there too. It's just a compliment from a woman hits differently.
I can understand that.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about personality, emotions, things that I really, really enjoy. And I know that I'm going to defer to you. You're the expert in this. So do me a favor, please, Mandy. Introduce yourself, tell my audience a little bit about who you are, and of course, where they can find you.
Yes, thank you. I am so honored and excited to be on your show. I love your authentic conversations you've had with other guests. I've been a performance coach for the past 26 years. I had the privilege and honor of starting off at a young age of 21 when I was introduced to Tony Robbins, and it was a whirlwind of an adventure. And it was at that time that I got introduced to my first personality assessment. And I'll give you this Snapchat story because I think it's relevant with our conversation. You know, I wanted to be a Tony Robbins coach. Like if you ever watch Rudy when he wanted to play for Notre Dame, that was like the spirit of young Mandy. And I, was really young and green and very little life experience. And the reason why I got hired, because it was intensely competitive. The reason why I got hired was because of this one assessment called the DISC assessment. DISC, for your listeners who aren't familiar with it. It's one of the most popular, I would say, assessments that corporate America uses with hiring and managing their team because it's really simple. It's four different categories, right? Well, I geeked out on that assessment because it was that assessment that taught me why certain classes in school I struggled with, why I was really good at certain things but sucked at others and just didn't know why. And it's really easy to make up a story that, oh, am I stupid or what's wrong with me? Like our brains, all of our brains tend to go there when we don't know an answer because our brains have to have an answer, even if it's a bad one. We have to have one. And so that got me on the journey of personality assessments. Fast forward, I got introduced to a beautiful human by the name of Russell Brunson, and I introduced him to personality assessments. And he thought I was a little spooky when I read his assessment results and when I read his wife's assessment results. And that got him hooked on assessments, and he hired me to coach his coaches at the time and then his staff. And then Russell, I have to give Russell credit. He's the one who created the software at understandingpersonality.com. And that's where people can find me. They could also find me at my name, mandykeene.com. But that's where he had the vision. I have to give him credit for this, Terrain, is that he came up with the vision of like, it's like Facebook meets the top six personality assessments in one. And now as a coach, I can't coach someone without them having their understanding personality profile because it tells me so much about someone in just a few minutes by looking at their results.
And as I shared, personality is such a big component in my life because I began to realize things about myself that I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense over here, and that makes sense over here. And this is why I'm in some of the situations that I've been in my life. How impactful is it for a person to understand their personality type and why?
That's such a beautiful question. I would say it's extremely impactful. I always like to give this disclaimer for all the skeptics. The number one objection that I hear when it comes to taking a personality assessment is, oh, I don't like those. I don't believe in those because I don't want to be put in a box. And here's my response to that is, and I say this with lots of love for our humanity, is if you believe that, you're actually already in a box because the box is ignorance. I was ignorant the fact that I'm not naturally very detail oriented. I know that you and I are talking on these microphones. You got a nice headset. what it took to get this all set up, it took someone who had familiarity with details. I actually got help to get mine all set up because it's not something that I'm great at. It takes a lot of energy for me to focus on something like that. And so for me at a young age, I got blessed with the awareness of, oh, Mandy should never do admin. Mandy shouldn't be a CPA, or go into a field that requires a lot of that task oriented, detail oriented activity because it's not going to be my strong suit. Instead, I'm really great with people. And that's why when I became a coach and I started working with people, it was effortless. It was natural. Now, I still needed to grow, I still needed skills, but it fit me. And so I find that in our culture, there's a lot of people who are lost, a lot of people who are in, they're in jobs that they're not compatible with, they're in romantic partnerships that they're not compatible with. When you are living a life that isn't in alignment, I liked what one of your guests said, and I'm so I forgive me with my memory, I forgot her name, but she talked about it's more about integrity, and integrity is like alignment, right? When we're not in alignment with the profession that fits us, when we're not in alignment with the relationships that really fit with us, and that's integrity. Integrity isn't a moral issue, it's an alignment issue, then we suffer a lot. It sucks. So when we're in alignment, it's fun. When we're in alignment, we have joy. When we're in alignment, it's natural. Doesn't mean that we don't have pain because we're, here on planet Earth. It's not the Garden of Eden, but we don't have that yucky suffering that so many people are plagued with, and it's because they don't know who they are.
Do you then think some people prefer not being in alignment because it's easier than doing the work to come into alignment in their life?
I think it's human nature to be scared of change. I do. I think it's human nature to be scared of change. I think, really what it is, it's less of a fear of alignment and it's more of a fear of the unknown. When I'm 47, and at 40 I went on a very deliberate conscious quest to significantly heal myself. I was suffering from chronic migraines and I didn't know why. And I went on this journey and I made a vow that I would do whatever it took. And I had no idea that it was going to cost me as much as it did. I'm really glad that I was unaware of that. But I bring that up that even though I was in so much pain, it still was scary for me to make some of the necessary choices that I needed to make to heal. And I did feel better after, but there was still this fear. So I think it's more of like an addiction to familiarity, an addiction to what's familiar, and it can be scary to go into the unknown, even when it's better for us. I think it's important to have compassion for ourselves and compassion for each other of why we have this resistance to growth and healing.
Especially because you made a good point, especially when we've been that way for so long, right? I shared with someone that you should hopefully learn about yourself every 10 years, right? So in your 20s, you may have been one way. In your 30s, you look back and you're like, Mandy, oh my God, what I did in my 20s was just insanity, right? And then as you begin to enter your 40s, I think for many people, that's where they're like, okay, I have a grasp on who I am, who I want to be, and let's get that done because I know what I don't want, right? Because I've been doing that for so long. What do you then think are maybe when you mentioned that you wanted people to have some compassion and it may be a sense of, let's say, fear of the unknown? Do you then think that maybe some people may think or feel that they're not worthy of this new person because the value of themselves is so low?
Oh, yes, I can relate to that. I definitely have experienced what so many people say in the self-help field. There's this term you're probably familiar with called imposter syndrome. And I like to say, Terrain, that imposter syndrome is achievers' way of saying, I have shame. Because it sounds better to say I have imposter syndrome than to say I have shame. Ooh, that's heavy, right? But I know that for myself and what I've witnessed in so many people's lives is that when it takes a lot of humility to recognize I need to make a shift within myself. And there's not a lot of celebration and encouragement when it comes to growth, when it comes to true growth. It can be quite lonely at times. And I think that because of our culture and society celebrates celebrates a lot of external things that are not necessarily real. And so it's so easy to get into that trap. And so it takes a rebel, it takes a rebellious spirit to go, okay, I'm actually going to take responsibility and really look within. And it's really interesting you bring up the 40 years. I don't know how much of you familiar with Carl Jung's work, but one of his famous quotes that I absolutely love is he says, "You don't really begin living life until 40 because the first 40 years of life is just research." And I love that. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I want to change it. I think that we, as human beings, I believe that we could do better for the parenting and the raising of our children. And I do believe that we can, you know, make a shift with that so we don't spend 40 years completely blind, not knowing who we are and why we're here. But I think that there's definitely truth to that.
I will agree. Like if I take it, because you mentioned imposter syndrome, and I see a lot of people struggle with that, not only in their relationships, but let's say at their job. And if I look at, let's say, corporate America, corporate Canada, where I am currently, is all the training, all the knowledge that we get in the first, let's say, 6 months of any job we take on can be intense at times. Compare that to your relationships or raising children or even just yourself. How much training do you do? Zero. Right? Like it's interesting to see how something that in its basic form is just giving us money to live a lifestyle that maybe we want, but something that can fuel us, replenish our cup, make us happier at more peace. We spend very little time maybe thinking about it in that sense. Um, from your experiences in general, what can maybe someone do to understand their personality better and then find peace and happiness within it?
Oh, you are a master at these juicy questions. First off, thank you for sharing what you just shared. That was really insightful of the lack of training. It shows us where our value systems are in our culture. Uh, so, one of my favorite things about personality assessments, and I always like to give this disclaimer that there's no assessment on planet Earth that can encompass the depths of your soul or the complexity of who you really are. You know, these personalities are kind of like our bodies. They're temporary. However, with that, it's so important to understand how we're wired and what we need. It's like, to me, it's the ultimate self-care manual. And so, like, for example, I have many clients who are self-made millionaires because I have the honor of being Russell Brunson's inner circle coach. That's his mastermind where he coaches very successful entrepreneurs. And something that I've learned in coaching these types of personalities is they're extremely ambitious and they're naturally more assertive, and they have personalities where it's not their intention, but in their personal relationships and sometimes with their team, they unintentionally can hurt people's feelings, right? They can because they're so results focused and they're so direct and blunt and bold. It's what's made them really great in business because of the game of business and how it's played, but it has hurt them in their interpersonal relationships. And because they're not aware consciously of this, of how they are and how other people are different, it has caused a lot of suffering when they start to understand, oh, okay, so not to take it personally. We hear that saying, don't take things personally. It's impossible to not take things personally when we don't understand the story, when we don't know the behind the scenes. I think it's one of the reasons why we tend to like stories of the backstory of the villain. Why have those movies done so well? I think it's because they produce compassion. We go, oh, no wonder she became the evil queen. Of course she did. Now I know why she did, right? And so it's not justifying the behavior, it's not condoning the behavior, but now we have this compassion because we have this insight. And so when my clients or myself or friends or family, when they understand, oh, that's why I come across the way I do, and that's why certain people react the way they do, it empowers them because now, and this is the power and the magic of assessments. Yes, part of it is a lot self-awareness. The other part, terrain, is to know how to communicate with people who are different than your own. That's when you become really influential. That's when you experience a deeper level of intimacy and connection in all your relationships, which I believe is what we all crave.
From a romantic relationship standpoint, then, how important is it for, let's say, me and my personality type to understand the personality type of my partner so we can grow together instead of growing at odds?
Oh, it's everything. My beloved, my guy, I'm constantly bringing up kind of what his personality type is. It's different than my own. He moves a lot faster, so his personality type, he's assertive, and he moves a lot faster than me. And he knows that I need to take a little bit more time and space. And because he's aware of that, he's able to go, oh, okay, yes, no, take your time. And he understands that I'm going to need more time than he is to, let's say, get ready, or if we're going to go somewhere. Um, it takes more time for me to get a thought out that is a new thought. And so sometimes I pause and I need him to be silent and just listen. And and then I know for him, he feels loved when I am willing to try something new because he has a very adventurous personality. He likes to try new things. And so I know to enter his world, it's going to help me grow because I am going to be more adventurous to try new things with my guy. And with him, he appreciates that I help him ground and slow down. And so if we weren't conscious of this, it would be super easy to make up stories about one another that aren't true. But because we understand each other's differences, we understand what each other needs in order to recharge our batteries, it becomes more of this dance that is more enjoyable. And there's less, again, it's all about the stories we make up in our heads. And personality assessments simply help shine the light on the truth of how we're wired, and it dispels those toxic stories that tend to keep us apart and tend to feed on conflict.
When you mentioned the story of the villain, it got me thinking that we all enjoy the journey, right? Like a hero's journey, we usually hear that story at the end, right? They save their village. We can all relate to that act, but we don't know necessarily why they wanted to become the hero. Whereas the villain arc, when you look at on an individual level, I think we all can relate because we all feel inside of us that we're that one moment away from maybe doing something that would have compromised who we were, right? Maybe there's like a tragic death in your family, or maybe there's a bad breakup, you lost your job, and you're like, okay, I may need to do some things that 2 hours earlier I wouldn't have done. And when you mentioned the growth and the different personalities that you and your partner have and you guys are communicating, I think that's the part that a lot of people probably miss is that you have to talk about it. Right? There's a sense of like arrogance where it's like, man, do you know what? Everyone is like me. All 8 billion people. They like the same thing as I like. They don't like the same things I like. Why do you think some people get caught up within their own world when they're trying to help other people and say that, okay, I'm going to assume Mandy likes these things because I like these things?
It's a lot of it is fear. Believe it or not, a lot of it is fear because what so what trauma does, we hear that word trauma more now, and my favorite definition is from Dr. Gabor Mate, where he says trauma is a disconnect from our authentic self, from our true self. And the more trauma someone experiences, the more constricted they are, the tighter they are. So when you describe, let's say, a person that just assumes things and lacks curiosity, to me, the sign of a very healthy human is someone who's extremely curious. Someone who is carrying a lot of trauma is less curious, and it's because they don't have the bandwidth. I think of like a scared child in the corner, just crouched down, right? They're white knuckling life. And so it's more about their psyche is not able to expand and to be able to uh, allow themselves to be curious. And so going back to, I don't think I fully answered your question from earlier about worth. How do we create more self-worth? It's something that is not just magically given. It's something that is created. I know for myself, I have a lot more self-worth today than I ever have. And it's because I've had to do things where I had to choose myself instead of pleasing others. And every time I did that, there was usually a price to pay. Because if you go from, I was a chronic people pleaser. I mean, as people pleasing as you could, like if you and I were friends, there's Mandy, I'm moving Saturday. You want to come over at 7 a.m. to help me move? I'd be like, yeah, even though I didn't want to, right? It was because I was so afraid of losing that connection and that attachment. And so when I went from being a people pleaser to starting to love myself, I lost a lot of people in my life. And it was painful and it hurt and it sucked. I'm not going to lie. But the beauty and the benefit is I was regaining myself. So you think of self-worth, every time we make a choice that is honoring ourselves, especially those choices that are scary, especially those choices that have a lot of resistance, that's when this internal self-worth is created. It's not something that can be gained by affirmations. Believe me, I've tried. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with affirmations, but I'm talking more about it's those times when the friends say, hey, will you help me with this? Or you come over for that and you don't want to. And you say, no, thanks. I'm going to stay home. No, thanks. I'm going to take care of myself. And then they get upset with you and you stay firm in honoring yourself. That's how self worth is created. It takes a lot of grit and courage. I find that there's many people out there selling things that create self-worth that really don't. It takes a lot of grit and courage, and there's just no way around it. The journey can be very challenging, but well worth it.
What you just described and what you shared seems like you and I have a similar personality because I went through that same experience in my 20s. I always felt that I was going to be working with people, helping people. But because that was in my personality, it led me to people pleasing. I didn't have the boundaries because in our 20s, do we even know what boundaries are? Like, what the hell is a boundary, right?
No, didn't know what a
Um,
boundary was.
no, I played sports. I knew what a boundary on a field was, but I didn't know
Yes.
what an emotional boundary was. And then I got the house that I'm currently living now, which was later on in my 20s. And then I invited those people that I was people pleasing. And one of them said, Terrain, why is it that you can get a house and I can't? That's when I knew something had to change. Like addicts, that was my rock bottom. I was like, wow, the people that I've been pleasing for all these years, my moment of happiness, and one person made it about them. I went on a journey because everything started to make sense, right? It's like that song, I can see clearly now, the rain is
Yes.
gone, right? It was
Yes.
just like that. And to
Yes.
your point, I paid a price. The circle of friends, later on that year, I didn't have them. I was experiencing loneliness in my success. The more successful I became in my job and more successful I became in my life, the less people wanted to be around. Terrain, you changed. You're not one of us anymore. What are some of the impacts that some people face when they're on this journey and they begin to lose some people and now they're starting to feel the pain of their emotional success?
Oh, Terrain, thank you for sharing that with me. And I love that you had the courage to go through that and to see that versus what happens with so many people is they can fall back because it's too scary, it's too painful. I think the first thing is to understand that if you're going through that and you're experiencing that grief and that loneliness, believe it or not, you're actually on the right track. I think when we're in pain, it's very easy for our brain to go, I'm doing something wrong. This is wrong. I need to fix it. It's part of the journey. Jim Carrey says that, the way to liberation is through a river of tears. And it's like when we're grieving and we're crying and we're feeling that pain of that loneliness. I used to be terrified to be alone. I used to not like to be home alone in my house. And when I asked my husband at the time to move out and we got divorced, I had to face that fear of being alone. And I never had in my life experienced so many people not like me until I started setting boundaries. So now I was experiencing my fear of being alone, and I was also experiencing what it felt like to be the villain in someone else's story because I set boundaries. And it sucked. It did not feel good. And I think it's important, I think the more people like you and I that share the the journey that we went through, that hey, yeah, if you feel lonely, if you're scared, if you're crying, you're actually on track. You're actually going, that is part of the journey. Now, you don't need to do it alone. That is when you do find the beautiful souls who can stand there in your pain. I became extremely close to my now 25-year-old niece. She was one of the only people who could sit by me when I was crying and the snot's coming out and give me toilet paper and make me peppermint tea. She was one of the only people. I would have never known that my niece Kendall had that ability until I went through that. And so the part of the beautiful part of the dark night of the soul is you find who really has your back, who really can be there for you. And it's usually not who you would ever predict. It's usually a surprise. So I think it's important to know that it's okay. It's okay. And it won't last forever. I think that's something that is a good reminder. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts is remind me of the movie, since you mentioned Dark Knight, remind me of a Batman movie where it says that you either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. And when you're on your healing journey, it feels like you're going to live forever because the journey is not short, but you will become the villain in someone's story because unfortunately there are people that don't want you to change, because if you're a people pleaser like you and I shared, Mandy, buy me a chair, pay for my flight, buy me food, deliver this. You stop doing that. Oh my God, I gotta do these things for myself. Well, yeah, it's called growing up. Let's be an adult and I'll stop relying on people. But unfortunately, there's a victim that graduates every June. There's always going to be someone else to be used and abused. So my thoughts are I absolutely agree because I've seen it. I've seen people make the change. They see the people around them for who they are now because the mask has fallen, the veil has been taken off. But what happens is sometimes they'll get sucked back in because they're like, to our earlier point, maybe I'm not worthy enough to join this group over here who are further along in their journey. Or they become even more destructive to themselves because now they got to go back and prove to the people that they were leaving. No, no, no. I'm still like you guys. I'm going to be even more toxic, even more chaotic, even more destructive. From a partner perspective, then, Mandy, how can someone who's in a relationship with a person like that, how can we help them to cope and understand that there's going to be bumps, some big, some small, but the person does need your support.
Oh, yes. Well, I would say definitely having an outside perspective, Terrain, I had one of my friends called it my entourage. I had I worked with two therapists, I had a intuitive healer and an astrologer. So I was not alone through this journey. Sometimes I felt like I was going through the spiritual ICU, and I just imagine that I had all these spiritual doctors, if you will, that were helping me. So I highly recommend not going through this journey alone. I would recommend working, whether it's with a therapist or a healer or a coach, someone who is going to have that outside perspective. Because had I not had that help, I wouldn't have known that some of the dynamics in my relationships, I got to have the compassion and the wisdom from my wise counsel of that's what we call codependent. And I got to learn, oh, that sounds like when Mandy, you were self abandoning. I remember being first taught that term self abandoned, and I felt like Joe Dirt. I was like, how can I abandon myself when I'm always with myself? I don't get it. Like, how is that possible? And then I started to notice anytime that I chose someone else's needs over my own, it was self abandonment. And I think if someone is listening and they're in a relationship right now that you're maybe not sure if it's healthy or if it's the best, I think the first step is to realize that you are a human being with needs. And I remember when my therapist first told me, Mandy, I'm just concerned you're not getting your needs met. And I kid you not, Terrain, my first thought was needs. I have needs. I didn't even know what that looked like. When we go to the doctor, we know we need to drink water, or we know we need things like B12. We know we need these nutrients in our body to keep us alive. But when it comes to relationships, to your point that you made earlier, we're not taught that we have emotional needs. We're not taught that, you know what, I need that physical touch. I love holding hands with my guy. I love that he's a cuddle monkey. I love that he'll tell me that he loves me. And if I need to talk, he will slow down and stop and we'll look eye to eye. And I need to have that conversation. There's human needs that we all have. And I think becoming aware of the needs that you have physically, mentally, emotionally is what's going to empower you to then attract the right partner and the right friends to play with and grow with. Now I'm much more aware of my needs, and I'm much more aware of who's going to fit in my world versus who wouldn't be compatible. Does that make sense?
It does. And it reminds me, as you were saying that, it reminded me of a situation where a man was coming to me and he was asking, how can he help his partner because she was going through a difficult time? And I mentioned to him, just be supportive, right? That's probably the first thing, and communicate. But unfortunately, he turned around and he said that she doesn't want to communicate, she doesn't want to talk about it, she's isolating, and she said that she doesn't have time for the relationship anymore. He was devastated, right? Um, and then I asked him this question, and this question that I asked him, I was like, how does she soothe herself? They said she works and she works and she works. And I was like, hmm. And this might sound a little bit out there, everyone, but what I found in my experiences, and I'll get you to do this as well, Mandy, is that many people later on in life, I want to say, but I think maybe women's experiences a little bit more, they'll just drown themselves in work. They do the 10 hours, the 12 hours, the 14 hours. They'll pour into the cup of everybody at work and forget to either replenish their own cup, or that the people in their romantic lives, their partners, their children, they don't have that because there's, to your point, a fear that no matter how chaotic my life is, I need to make sure that work is okay because work is going to keep me safe, right? What are your thoughts on that situation and that scenario for this couple?
Yes. Well, it's It's really important to understand that we all, as human beings, all of us have two basic human needs. We have the need for attachment, and that attachment, there's different levels and qualities of attachment, but they've done those studies on babies that if babies aren't held they literally die. And I believe the same thing is true for us adults. If we don't feel and perceive, what matters is our perception that we have these attachment relationships, that's when we either develop an addiction or an affliction. And so we need that attachment relationship. We all need a sense of belonging. But then this is where we get a little complicated as human beings. We have another need, and that is the need of authenticity. Thy own self be true. And we need that. And what happens is most of us, I love my parents. I think our parents did the best that they knew how. Hey, if we judge them, we just look at our grandparents and go, I don't know how you survived, right? And then we just keep going on up. So we're doing better in some ways, I believe, as a humanity. So we have this attachment need. And what happens in our childhood is we learn how to attach to our caretakers, to our parents. And it's usually not authentic. It's usually not who we really are. But guess what? Thank goodness we were able to do it because it helped us survive childhood. It helped us survive that attachment relationship. Then we get the fun part, and I'm being a little cheeky here, but of unlearning all of that behavior. So the woman who is, let's say, addicted to work, that tells me a lot about her childhood. She probably got praised and she probably got the most attention from her parents, caretakers, for her accomplishments, right? So she perceives that that attachment is through her work and through accomplishment. It's hardwired. And so some of us, for it sounds like you're a kindred spirit like me, and that you and I, we survived our childhood by being pleasers, by being super nice. And then we had to unlearn that in order to heal the addiction or affliction or both that we got, because it's impossible to be healthy and inauthentic. And so this man, I would say it's really easy for me to say this, I know, and I say this with compassion, but that woman was doing him a favor, because if she was not willing to grow, the relationship is doomed. When my man, he's actually a dear friend, and I didn't know he got divorced, and then he confessed that he had a crush on me, and so we had this beautiful foundation of a friendship. And when he shared that with me, the first question I asked him, Terrain, was, "Well, do you want to grow?" And I just said it like that. I wasn't classy. I wasn't smooth. I was just like, before we go any further, like not even a first date, I need to know this, because to me, that is the most important question to ask someone in a romantic relationship. It's not, do you love me? It's not, it's, are you willing to grow? Because that's the only way you're going to be able to meet each other's needs and to be able to stay together through every single transformation. Is there has to be this conscious commitment to growth. And I believe that's what's missing in so many relationships.
I think that question is a big one. And I think the reason why it's missing is there's many people who are afraid of the answer, right? Like I remember asking someone who I was with at that time, this was many years ago, where do you see the two of us going? Like how are we going to grow together? The person's like, what do you mean train? I was like, oh, good Lord. I was like, are we dating with intention? Are we dating just to sleep with each other? Are we like, what's the goal? I was like, oh, no one has asked me that question. I was like, okay, I'm going to ask you another question that's going to blow your mind. What does retirement look like for you? Retirement? I haven't thought about that. I was like, well, do you plan to be single, sleeping around, and working until you die? Or, right, like these are serious conversations. There was a time, and I know I'm sounding like that old person, back in my day, there was a time where our parents would have these conversations with other parents when their marriage was arranged. we've kind of lost that conversation.
Mm.
Like people don't ask these questions. Why do you think people don't ask the big, scary questions when they're trying to create and, to your point, grow together in their relationships?
They haven't been taught. You know, it's like what you're saying with your brilliant example of like when you join a company and they have this immersion and they have a training program and they have an onboarding program. I don't know about you, but I was not taught how to date. I was not taught how to the qualifications of being a partner or being a good friend. And so a lot of this is ignorance. A lot of this is we have not been set up to win. And it's important again to have compassion for ourselves, our parents, our society. I have the belief that everybody really is doing their best, that if they knew how to do better they would do better. And so I believe that the more of us that become aware and responsible, that creates a ripple effect. I'm sure that you have positively impacted people in your life that you, Terrain, may not even be aware of because you've grown and because you've taken that responsibility. And I also find that, again, it takes courage to be intentional. Like you were asking this young woman that you were dating that, what's your intention? And most people uh, don't have that encouragement to be intentional. Most of us, think about it, are not in cultures that foster those conversations. People, when I go to like networking things or parties, I'm usually a little like the odd one there because I don't know how to do small talk. I usually ask the questions like, "Oh, okay, I just met you and you're asking me, and I just that's part of how I'm wired. And so I like to be with people who want to have those intentional conversations. I like to, like, we just met today and look at the quality of our conversation we've just had. I know you have your own podcast show, but think about it. This conversation to me has, I've shared things with you that people who I'm related to have never heard me talk about because there wasn't the intention of having that conversation. You set the intention. Okay, I'm going to interview this woman named Mandy Keene, and we're going to have this conversation around personality assessments and emotions, life. And that's why we're able to dive deep. It's because of that intention. But I don't believe that people have been taught or encouraged. And so it's different, it's new.
How can we then help people to identify and understand their emotions if they weren't taught at an earlier age?
Well, it's going to sound really cliche and corny, Terrain, but I'm going to give you my first answer and then I'll give you a second deeper one. But my first answer is to be an example. It really is to be an example. One of the things that I practice, and it is a practice, is that when I cry in front of someone, I don't apologize. If you notice that when most people are upset, whether it be sad or angry or scared, we apologize. I just wrote a book. It isn't out yet, but I titled it Not Sorry. And it's because when I stopped apologizing for my emotions, I became a walking permission slip for everybody else around me that it's okay. It's okay to be like, I'm scared, or I'm nervous, or I'm really sad, or I'm pissed off, or whatever it may be, and to not apologize for it and to allow that awkward pregnant pause that can happen between people because they're not used to that. That alone to me makes more of an impact than anything else, is being that example. And then I would say, if someone really wanted to dive deeper, is to make a vow to get to know this fascinating human that you are. Because you are there is not a human being on earth who doesn't have a story, who's not fascinating. I believe that we're all like that movie Jumanji. We all have these awesome superpowers and gifts. If you don't believe that you do, it's just because you've been sold a lie. The truth is, if you're a human being on planet Earth, you do have a genius, you do have superpowers, you do have gifts. And so I would invite people to get really curious. And then you also have kryptonite. You also have things that you're not supposed to be good at. Terrain, I was not supposed to be a good cook. I have tried, I have like I have done so many things, and I've realized it's part of my avatar. I'm not meant to be like a chef or a cook. And so that's something that I embrace and I accept about myself, and it's liberated me. And so I think when we become aware of things that we're naturally really great at and own them, and then be lighthearted about the things that, I could not be an Uber driver. I would never get 2 stars. Like I would get people lost, and people probably have anxiety attacks with the way that I drive. That's something that I'm not as great at. But when it comes to coaching, when it comes to inspiring people to see who they really are, when it comes to relationships and having compassion for your spouse or your children or your friends, that's where I shine. That's where I got some gifts. So it's I encourage people to look at this kind of like a game, and to give yourself permission to be really curious.
I'm at the point in my life where I pay a company for food. Meal prep,
Yes,
because I can't cook
yes,
at this point, right? I've
yes,
accepted that I can't cook. I was like, you know what? That's perfectly fine. I'm good at budgeting.
yes.
So just add it to my sheet. $60 every week. Meals for 7 days.
Nice.
You made a good point where you said that we weren't taught how to feel our emotions and understand our superpowers. How do you then think guilt and maybe shame plays in the role of us understanding our emotions, feeling them, and embracing our superpowers within?
Well, this is where I'm going to say some things that might be contradictory to what you or possibly your listeners have been taught. And I firmly believe that guilt, and this is why I wrote my book, Not Sorry. Guilt is a manufactured emotion. It was Oxford University did the study on all these emotions, and what was fascinating is they found a benefit for every single emotion, gave some sort of benefit, gave some sort of insight into why we have them, except guilt. And the reason why guilt, I believe, is a manufactured emotion from our toxic society is it keeps us in the past. And anything that keeps us in the past is not healthy. And so guilt is something to be aware of. I've wrestled with a lot of guilt, and it's something to unlearn. And one of the greatest gifts that my mentor, I got to give him credit, Dr. Gabor Mate, gave me was, whenever you're making a decision that's between guilt and resentment. So like, someone asks you a favor to help you with something, or to go somewhere that, like I hate bowling. I will never bowl again. You're not going to see Mandy in a bowling alley. So if someone asks me, Mandy, want to go bowling? I'm like, no, I'm not going to go bowling. But let's say I might feel guilty to say no because I don't want to hurt their feelings. Or I could go bowling and hate it and be resentful. Dr. Mate says to always choose guilt, and the reason why is because resentment is poison. Resentment is what creates this cancer within us. Resentment kills. Resentment creates disease. Guilt Guilt is something that we can unlearn. Guilt is something that we can start to deprogram and unlearn and become liberated from. And so that's what I got to say on guilt. And then shame is slightly different. Shame, it's tricky because I find that shame can lead to getting stuck in guilt. Is shame is, I perceive myself as wrong or bad. Now, if I said something to you right now that hurt your feelings, and I could feel that it hurt your feelings, and it was just because I wasn't being mindful, I wasn't being aware, I might feel this sting of like, ooh, this like shame. That is good for me to feel that and acknowledge that, so I can shift my behavior and go, oh my gosh, Terrain, I want to apologize for saying what I said. That I could tell that that hurt your feelings, and I want to let you know I'm going to do better. I'll give you a very personal example. I don't use Snapchat anymore, but way back when I used Snapchat and I would snap my friends, and um, I vented to one of my friends about my sister, and I accidentally sent the Snapchat to my sister. I was like, oh my gosh, I was mortified. And my sister's a sweetheart and she did not deserve that. I felt this shame. I felt, oh, that was not good. And I apologized and I made amends to my sister. And that pain, that taught me before I speak about anybody to anyone, would it be okay for that other person to hear it? And it nipped my gossip in the bud because I really, really hurt my sister. And my sister's one of my favorite people. And so I think sometimes we bypass it or try and justify it. I think when we do something that is out of character, and it's usually been taught to us, taking that responsibility, like I take responsibility that I did that to my sister. I take that responsibility, and now I'm grateful that I went through that because it nipped a really toxic pattern in the bud. And that's the gift of feeling that sting of that shame. But swimming in guilt, that doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah, guilt, as I look back on it, it does keep you in the past. And the deeper that you're in the guilt, the darker your future looks because now you can't see a way out of it. And one thing that I've observed with people who've experienced guilt is that for some people, it becomes comfortable. The reality of life without the guilt becomes uncomfortable. And it's difficult for them to maybe understand how they're going to navigate other emotions because they're just wearing it's like a jacket, right? You have the patch of guilt, and now it's bigger than the other emotions of happiness, of peace, of whatever it is you want to name them, right? When we're trying to understand how the different emotions can impact us, what are maybe some of the dangers of getting stuck in one or maybe two of them for a long period of time?
Wow, I love how you describe that. You kind of just put me in a trance with that. It was so beautiful because I identify with it was much of my identity, and to be dead honest with you, Terrain, that if it wasn't for migraines, I would have stayed with that. Migraines were my alarm system to break out of that and was my leverage to go, okay, this is not who I am anymore. And so I would say that most people are addicted to two or three emotions that they feel every week. Most people, have you ever met people that are like really unhappy or just angry and they're always angry, right? It's like, I find that angry people will always find a reason to be angry. I had someone in my life who's no longer in my life, uh, where it was almost comical to me. It didn't matter if we went to the movie theater or a restaurant, she would find a reason to be really mad. And I found it just to be like almost like an artwork. I'm like, it's fascinating. It doesn't matter what's happening. You will find the one thing to be very angry with. And so the first thing is awareness, is to become aware that there is a rainbow of emotions for us to access, and that you know it's really important to recognize your power, that you have the power to go, you know what, I don't know if I want to be this angry person anymore, or you know what, I don't know if I realized that I spent most of my life feeling guilty. That cloak you were talking about, I totally identify with being that person, and it was excruciating to break out of it. I felt like, in those like vampire movies where someone's a werewolf and they have to like break all their bones before they're a werewolf and you see them transform and it's just like gruesome. That's how it felt to me. I know I may sound dramatic, but it was excruciating to break out of that guilt and into a place now where I easily say no. It took a lot to go through that. So my biggest thing that I like to pass on when it comes to changing the emotions that we feel is it's so important to value gentleness, to value slowing down, because that's actually what's required for this transformation. Being harsh and trying to hurry, that actually makes the pain last longer, believe it or not. But when we, take a breath and have a pause, that's when there's room for the magic to come in. That's when we notice, wow, I've never noticed the sunset. I've never noticed the different colors of the trees. And you begin to notice things that you didn't notice before.
You hear words like echo chamber or misery loves company, for example, right? Those people who are experiencing, let's say, two to three emotions, because I had a friend that he was very negative to your point, anger, complaining. And then one day I asked him, I was like, is there anything that makes you happy? He's like, I am happy. And he yells it in anger that he's happy, right? And I was like, oh my God, if that's happiness, I would hate to see you upset. But could it be then maybe some people who are experiencing emotions, but they're channeling it in a more chaotic way, don't have examples or positive reinforcement of other emotions that they can learn from?
Well, it's to bring in personality assessments. I find that a lot of it is not understanding how to take care of yourself, because, like, how we've been taught. There's some people terrain there where, if they don't have a physical vigorous activity, I've told some of my clients, they know this. If you don't have physical vigorous activity, you're going to turn into the Incredible Hulk, because their personality is so hardwired and it's really intense. Like, here's the beauty of your personality: you're way more driven than most people. You're way more, you got a big picture. This is your gift, this is your superpower. But if you don't like kick or hit a bag or run up a hill, we're not going to want to be around you because you're so intense. And so once they understand, oh, this is how I take care of myself. I need to hit a bag. I need to run up a hill. I need to do these things. Someone like myself, if I don't take time to do nothing, like yesterday, my guy and we had a do nothing day. I said, I got to do nothing. Otherwise, it's going to get ugly. And I knew this because we'd been traveling and going so fast. If someone with my personality, if I don't take time to slow down and to have like a do nothing time, I get passive aggressive. I get really cranky. It's this dark side that comes out. I'm aware of it. And so I think once we become aware of what do we need, do you need more downtime? Do you need to run up a hill? Do you need to there's some people where they recharge when they're laughing with friends and they're just going to be goofy. And if they don't have that time, they start to become depressed. They start to become like Eeyore. And so I think if we get curious of, like, just like, plants need water and they need sunlight, our personalities, they need different things in order to recharge that battery. Most people don't know how to recharge their batteries. And once they do, it's a game changer.
Can finding out your personality be scary for some people because maybe they don't like it or they don't appreciate it in a way that they should?
Oh, yes, it's very vulnerable. It's very vulnerable. I've spoken. I'm actually thinking of someone right now who I really love this human, and I've worked with him for many years. And there was one assessment he hadn't taken yet. And I said, hey, I really want you to take it's the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment. And he said, I'm scared to take it, Mandy. And he really was sincere. And I said, I'm super curious. Will you tell me why? And he said, what if the results show that I'm not supposed to be doing the job I'm in? And I thought that was fascinating. I thought, well, then you wouldn't want to be doing the job you're in, right? And so I think of the former president James Garfield had a quote, and I may botch it, so forgive me, but it went something like, "The truth shall set you free, but first it will make you miserable." So it's like, when you're resistant to the truth, you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer. And what I find is that I actually get excited. I'm so weird, Terrain, but I actually get excited when people are scared to take assessments. Do you know why?
My guess would be because they're going to reveal something about themselves that maybe you can relate to, or you know that they're beginning their journey of being happy.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's you know what it is it's kind of like they're in jail and they're scared to getting out of jail. And it's like I can't wait to look on your face when you see, the your first sunrise. I can't wait to witness what it feels like for you to witness you feeling that feeling of joy. And so I believe one of the things for all of us who have gone through our dark night of the soul is to be just the biggest encouragers for others, to recognize that if they're hesitant in taking something like an assessment or being able to look at themselves, it's because they're used to their jail cell. And I believe it's our responsibility. It's not our job to fix or save them. That's not our job. Uh, what we can do, though, is we could be the biggest cheerleaders for them to break out. We could be the biggest encouragers for them to see what's possible. And then they can pass that on. I believe that the more of us, who can share our story of, yeah, I was in jail too. It sucked. It was boring. I promise it's so much better out here. I think that's one of the biggest gift we can give people who are afraid, and that it's only going to this is the truth. It's only going your misery and your suffering is only going to get worse with time. And so it's like, which pain do you want to feel? Do you want to feel the pain of this slow suffering yuckness? Or, spoiler alert, none of us get out of this game alive. Do you want to, you know what? Hey, I'm going to be a weirdo and I'm going to go for it and I'm going to get curious. And maybe, just maybe, I'll feel something that I've never felt before and it'll feel amazing.
The story you shared about the person who's hesitant to take the test, the personality test, because they may figure out parts of their life that they shouldn't be in, such as their job. That reminded me of a woman who she was getting sick. Her hands would go numb, her shoulders would go numb, her feet would swell because she was working in a job that her body was telling her, "Hey, this is not for you anymore." Right? Reminds me of that book, The Body Keeps a Score.
Yes.
So, right, your body would tell you the trauma, your body will show it to you because what you're doing in your life, it could be your friends, it could be your job, it could be your partner, isn't compatible with who you essentially are. But in this case, the money was good. So she was justifying it, right? Even though it was impacting her in all these other areas of her life. When you're working with people through the personality tests and understanding themselves, do you see that they find ways to justify not fully embracing it and maybe doing things that are incompatible with with the results that come out?
Absolutely. I know that I was doing the same thing in both my personal life and part of my career as well. And I think that is where when when I realized that my body is actually my best friend, and when I realized that my body is this advanced technology that I will never completely comprehend or understand, that's when I started to trust my body's reaction to things. And when it comes to money, and I have to say this especially for women in survival, when it comes to money, oh my gosh, it's so scary to think that the way that I'm used to surviving may not be my highest. But here's some good news that I want to share with you, Terrain, and your audience, that I believe is is really important to acknowledge, is that the truth about that woman with her hands and her body doing that, the truth is there is a calling that that woman has, and it's in her heart. Like, I don't have to tell her, you don't have to tell her, it's in her heart. And that calling is going to give her 10 times the prosperity that her current job is giving. Now, the switch and the change might look like she's going backwards temporarily. It might look like she made a mistake. If she's got to quit her job and find something else that pays less, who knows? But, something that I've been reminded of over and over and over again is that when I read someone's assessment results, and one of my favorite things to do is to look at their assessment results and let them know what they would be great at, what they would be, what the archetype that jumps out at me that I see that's on their profile. Here's what's really beautiful. It's never against what's in their heart. It only validates what's in their heart. It's only a validation of what is in their heart and their soul. We don't necessarily need personality assessments to tell us who we are. I just like them as tools. Like they're a piece of the puzzle piece to help us in a society where most of us have amnesia and no idea who we are and why we're here. But you think about the times when personality assessments didn't exist. How did people discover who they were? Well, there wasn't the technology in the rush society. People sauntered, people stared at the sun, people spent time with themselves. And so the truth eventually came to the surface. And so, this woman, something that I would tell someone who is in a situation like that is there is actually really good news. You're not a victim. There's actually a calling that you're meant to do here on this planet that is going to give your body a sense of relief and even energy. And it's the law of how things work that when you are in alignment, you have the perfect amount of prosperity that will come to you.
What is then something that you learned about yourself during your journey that you were surprised to learn?
I was really surprised to learn that a lot of people who I thought could be there for me uh, when either I was in pain or celebration really didn't have the capacity. I was surprised to learn the people who really were my match authentically. Uh, and the biggest thing is I was surprised to learn that how your story about you getting your new house and your one friend made it about him. Something that I've been most surprised to learn is that the list of people to call when something goes wrong tends to be a lot longer than the list terrain if like something really great happened, to you or to me today. The list of people that you and I can call is usually shorter. And it's because the people who can hold that space to actually authentically and sincerely celebrate with us, it's shorter because they don't have that joy in their life. And so I find that what has surprised me most is that there's a lot fewer people who have the bandwidth, the capacity, the ability to celebrate each other's wins and successes than there are people who are, can feel bad if something, bad happens in your life. And those are the people to nurture, those friendships, those relationships of people who are going to be genuinely excited and happy for you, whether it's a new house, whether you got a book deal, whether your podcast got a million downloads and you want to celebrate it with someone. It's like, who can you call? Those are the people to keep close. And that's something that surprised me for who was in my life. And now those are the people that I focus on nurturing those relationships.
So, Mandy, I want to ask you one final question as we close today, okay? I want to give you three wishes, and you can wish for anything in regards to this question except for more money and more wishes, of course. What are three things you wish people knew about their emotions and why?
Mm. I wish people knew that emotions are like ocean waves. They come and they go. And the better surfer you are, meaning the better that you can embrace whatever emotion it is and allow space for it, the more you're going to enjoy this ride. And that sometimes your emotions, actually many times your emotions may not make any sense, that doesn't matter. It's important to acknowledge whatever is coming up. And the other thing I would like to share with that is that our emotions are, it's been referred to as like the element of water, and our bodies are primarily made of water. And when you think of water that is stagnant, what do we all think of? We tend to think of a dirty swamp, right? It's like got all these bugs and animal pooped in it. It's disgusting, it's gross. And so when we stay stagnant, when we don't move, we don't